Oh, man. I'd gotten so used to the recording announcement. All right, I'm going
to let everyone know they're being recorded.
There you go, folks.
That's what it says. Yep.
Could imitate that message from Zoom. That would be good.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting of the Dunn County Executive Committee to order. Call of the roll. I think we're all here with, Tom Quinn. I'm like, wait a second, or is Tom online by any chance?
No, he called and he had some issues with connectivity, so he wasn't certain he was going to be able to join us.
Okay. Yeah, I just paused. I'm like, wait, no, I miscounted. All right, everybody but Tom Quinn. Next up, approval of the minutes. Supervisor Steen moves. Supervisor Morehouse seconds. Any discussion of the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Minutes are approved. Public comments. Do we have anyone here for public comments? Nope. Okay. No public comment?
Give me.
Wait, Kelly. Sorry.
Yes.
We did have a public comment submitted online.
All right. Over to you.
All right. On Monday, October 9th, 2023 at 3:09 p.m., we received the following comment. Public comments to committee. After looking at the agenda for the upcoming executive committee meeting, I strongly support Dunn County Communications in the form of YouTube as one of the methods of communications by the county. Off the top of my head, the directional planning process was adopted in March of 2016. I have read the DPP numerous times over the years. I think the last time the quote triangle end quote added any subjects was the broadband after Resolution 58. The legislative committee would or could be an addition, as I have looked at many counties' websites in the state, and many don't have a legislative committee. A plus for Dunn County. This committee brings in area politicians for their input and gives the county a line of communication to directly express the county's concerns. I would even suggest that the county communicates with the rest of the counties in this state. I was told that Dunn County sent an email out to the counties when the county created the resolution related to the tech college funding. I would say it's time to send this communication out to counties again. Maybe the legislative committee could do just that. I did a little research myself and contacted Brent Miller, manager of Sauk County. I sent him the resolution and he seemed on board. I contacted Juneau County, where I was born and have numerous cousins and direct family members. I have contacted the WCA quite honestly and not a reply to many of my emails. I have even sent emails showing my reply for the Legislative Reference Bureau, telling me there is no Wisconsin statute that public higher education is required for Wisconsin citizens. I have numerous times gone back through the former YouTube videos, especially certain committees. At Colfax Township Board and Plan Committee meetings, I have referenced Dunn County YouTube videos pertaining to the certain topics of discussion. I'm sure Dunn County will contact the townships in the county as Dunn County works on the new comp plan for Dunn County. It's called Intergovernmental Cooperation. Of course, I could go on and on. Keep the YouTube videos coming, please. Best regards, Terry Nichols, Town of Colfax Plan Commission. Thus ends public comments for the exec committee.
All right. Anything else on that one? All right. Hearing nothing. On to item 5, County Manager Report. Over to you, Chris.
All right, my apologies that the draft county board agenda did not make it into your packet, but there were some tweaks on it right up until kind of the last minute. So, but it's fairly straightforward. We have an acknowledgement of Marcia Finder's retirement. And actually the report that HR ran, I just had to put it in there. It was 38 years of service, but 14,018 days or 460 months. And we purchase orders. There was a change to the Red Cedar Racing schedule. Technically, their season ends by our agreement on September 30th. The week before that was the Punky Manor, and it was not good weather. So before that, they had asked if they could do an agreement to extend their season So we gave them until the 21st or 22nd of October. I thought I printed the thing, but anyway, 21st or 22nd of October. And then now that they rescheduled for this weekend, and now I think, yeah, Friday's supposed to be like, tsunami. So, I don't know what exactly that'll happen, what exactly will happen, but, they're gonna try to delay to Saturday and Sunday and try to get it in, I believe, but, it was a bit of a collective decision. We consulted with Anne, consulted with Nick, facilities in the end, felt that there was minimal risk involved in granting them an extension, and that was outweighed by whatever economic benefit there is of having the races take place. So just that it was, but I did say that we would make everyone aware of that decision. And sorry, I'm looking at the board. I'm like, I'm confused by my own agenda, but never mind. Then we will do a report by Brian Della from PMA, who you will hear his report here earlier or in a bit here today, who will give us some information on borrowing. And then we'll do a budget update, and you are going to be on top of that because of what we're going to talk about shortly with regard to budget. And then we have the county fair and IT reports, budget adjustments for 2023 from the sheriff and CJCC, ordinance amendment coming forward from the county clerk with regard to marriage license fees, adopting our health benefit premiums for 2024, a change in the highway department, in the employee handbook, addressing night work on I-94 by the highway department, and then the second reading of the use of county parks, hours and use of county parks. And one last resolution for budget transfer from the district attorney's office to IT. Fairly straightforward. I promise that we probably won't be there you won't be here for 4 hours today. Well, I shouldn't say that so definitively. And I don't think that you'll be there, that it should be a fairly succinct meeting as well. Any questions about that?
Supervisor Steen.
Just a question, it could be directed to you or to Ann. Is there some way that put some verbiage in the agreement with the Red Cedar Racing to address just what happened here, so that wouldn't necessitate a special meeting or anything?
That's on my list. That's on my list of things to talk about as we discuss renewal of the lease.
Thank you.
All right. With that, in your packets, you also had a document. So I think I will begin the conversation perhaps by turning this over to Supervisor Calabrese, because the question regarding the ongoing recording of public meetings first arose within judiciary and law. And so if you want to give us a little bit of background.
Sure, thank you. Yes, I believe that there was an incident with I'm not sure if this is exactly what brought on the conversation, but I remember an incident with the Menominee City Police and an overabundance of phone calls into the emergency management based on a video that was posted online. And if that wasn't the direct impetus for this conversation, it was around the same time. That's how I remember it. But we discussed the recordings of the Judiciary and Law Committee being posted to YouTube, being on the internet in perpetuity. And the sheriff mentioned that because of that, there are some hesitancies in what you might want to elaborate on in the committee, and so the discussion began there about what's the best way to address that. And some options were do we just not post the recordings, but record them? Do we delete them after a certain amount of time? And so then that discussion came, it continued, and the county manager and chairman had some further deliberations about it, and I think that's where we stand now.
If I might, Kevin, did you want to?
I can certainly.
All right, without objection. I thought getting your perspective directly was probably the simplest way to go about that.
No, I think that it's come up with, in discussion with other department heads, with judiciary and law, we deal with sensitive information. I think we want to be as transparent with you as possible. And when we're here in person and it's not recorded and we know who our audience is, what comes to mind, one example, a question came up with, do the judges have home security systems? You know, after a judge was killed, you know, down in Juneau County or wherever that was. And it's like, well, we really can't talk about that, you know, because this is being recorded and publicized. So we have to be vague. And I feel, you know, it's our job to be as transparent with you as possible. But I think we lack transparency just because we don't know who's going to be watching this for years to come. And if we want to be transparent with you and open with you, another thing that comes to mind with is I have to come back to judiciary and law when we want to do away with a hiring list. Well, I can't give you a whole lot of explanation as to why people didn't qualify and their backgrounds and things like that. That's more of a closed session discussion. Happy to talk about it in closed session, but I can't have it broadcast to the world to watch forever about why this candidate was washed out in the background, or did they fail a psychological test? Did they, you know, that's stuff we can't talk about in public forum. So, you know, several of the department heads and I have talked about it and they have the same concerns. You know, obviously the DA has some sensitive stuff. You know, she'd more than willing be willing to talk about if it's you and whoever else is in the room. What goes in the minutes of a meeting are the action items. It doesn't necessarily need to be the discussion, and that's what's posted on the World Wide Web for everybody to watch. So I feel you're not being, you know, we're not able to be as transparent with you and talk about our open business as much as we possibly could. So.
Thanks, Kevin. I really wanted to get that part of the perspective in there. Anyone have any questions for Kevin on that, or?
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
Sure. Supervisor Morehouse.
I have seldom discussed personnel issues in any of my standing committees. Is that a routine thing at CJCC or the
Judiciary and law,
judiciary and law?
by county ordinance right now, the judiciary and law has to approve if I want to start a new hiring process, and that they have to abolish the list, the current list. I have to get approval from judiciary and law. Well, I feel like I owe them an explanation as to why there's 4 people on the list yet, and I want to do away with the list. And those reasons can't really be discussed in open county board meeting.
Okay, I think that's unusual.
I think it is kind of an oddity for
Yeah,
that's the way the current county ordinance is written, that civil service ordinance is written.
all right, thank you.
Yeah, I know that the different committees have sort of different levels of what sort of information and the level of confidentiality that is going to be discussed in a given meeting. So, you know, one thing we might consider is more flexibility in the meetings, but I think one of the things that I would like to see is a little more, hey, here are a couple of things we should really be doing in closed meeting. And I think that's probably a conversation that, you know, this committee in particular should be more on top of what constitutes a reasonable closed meeting, you know, in terms of we are all responsible to some extent for the agendas of our committees. And I think maybe that's one of the things I'm working on right now is more supervisor and more chair education. And I think that's one of the things we're going to need to talk about. But I would like to let Kevin get away from the podium if no one else has anything for him. Thanks, Kevin. Supervisor Steen.
Yeah, this is not for Kevin, but it's for you or anybody that could answer it. It sounds to me like his purview is different just because of what it is, as opposed to other committees in the county. So do we need a blanket coverage, or can we approach this with the understanding that just because of the business he's in, it would be handled differently? That's my question, I guess.
I certainly think it's the case that, I mean, we want to have a general open meetings policy that follows the state policy. We want to be as open and honest with our constituents as we can be. We want to be inclusive. We also do need to look at the purview of specific committees and see how certain things are handled. And I suspect that the way to handle that particular piece is probably for judiciary and law to have a more or less regularly scheduled, not every meeting certainly, but a more or less regularly scheduled closed session for a few of those items that are particularly sensitive. But that's not fiat, that's just my opinion. Chris?
I was just going to say, so I included in your packets, the summary from YouTube in terms of the number of views that various meetings get. And those vary from anything from, let's see here. I'm just looking, the board supervisors meeting on January 19th had 134 views. And they go all the way down to like 1. But I'm just looking to see real quick if I can, I mean, just a smattering. Highway Department, May 11th meeting had 65. Board supervisors in July had 87. Board supervisors in May had 71. Board supervisors in April had 102. NDC on January 26th had 44. I'm just picking a smattering of them, but Judiciary and Law on May 23rd had 40. Community Resources and Tourism in February had 37. So there are a fair number of views, even to some of the more, perhaps, I hate to say obscure, but obscure meetings.
Oh, Supervisor Kinnear.
Yeah, I was really disappointed that PRD and the neighbors wasn't on there as much, but obscure, right? Now we're obscure. Okay. I applaud Sheriff Big for wanting to be totally open. I think of what Diane has reminded us more than once, or me anyway. We're a policy board, so personnel shouldn't be at a meeting. I shouldn't be told that someone was fired at the neighbors because they slapped the resident. That's what I leave up. That's what we leave up to the department heads. So I really do think that perhaps Kelly, that's an idea to have an actual closed meeting if those things need to be discussed. But I really would like to see every meeting up there so people can use it and see it, but maybe not forever.
And that was one of the other things that we discussed when we were talking about it is, do they need to be up there more than about 3 months? The downside of cutting them off, whatever your date is with the YouTube videos in particular, which is great for us because the storage is free and that makes our life much, much simpler. Somebody has to go through then, and it would be part of their job to turn off access to those videos over time, and that comes with a cost in terms of hours and staff time.
Yeah, that's something to consider. So I would suggest that we cut it off after a couple of years. I'll just throw that out there. Cut it off after a couple of years. We keep doing the meetings, and if someone wants to talk about personnel, go to a closed session and say that you're talking about personnel. That's just an idea.
Okay, Supervisor Morehouse.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It did indicate in this memo that that requires staff time and staff resources. How big a task would it be to delete videos?
Dan, you wanna?
Is it just as easy as going delete, 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 delete?
I wouldn't delete them, though. I would just turn off the access.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's, I mean, YouTube works that way and you can just shut it off. And I'm not going to speak for your department, but it's not, if somebody was like uploading, taking the time to upload it, they could also at that time just quick go and take things off as far as changing the access to the videos.
Yeah, somebody has to do that.
Yeah, but somebody does have to
Right.
do it, yeah.
So somebody has to go find all of the videos that are now 2 years old and disable those now 2-year-old videos and just kind of maintaining that as opposed to dumping it out there and never thinking about them again. So that's really the change. It's work. It's a part of somebody's job that's got to get done then.
Supervisor Steen.
I do not know anything about this stuff, but is there no way that you can have an arrangement with YouTube that it's going up and it's down in 2 months?
They won't negotiate with us. No, no, they don't have that retention features built in.
I bet they do. They just don't want to do it.
You could probably pay for it.
Supervisor Kinnear.
Thank you. So when someone posts this meeting, for example, could they just go and delete the last one? Or delete the one 2 years ago, like,
You gotta go find the one from 2 years
Is that-
ago
that's-
and know that it existed. So,
okay.
so that's what it would turn into, is probably like a once a month, somebody's gonna have a thing on their calendar that says, hey, go log into YouTube, go find everything that's over 2 years old and turn them off. So it's not, it's not, I mean, the most challenging work in the world, but it's one of those tasks that's not always fun to do and easily gets forgotten, frankly. So
Chris.
So to follow up, if they forgot it, so what? It's 2 years and 6 months old. But eventually it would, it's not like that's a terrible deadline or anything, but, okay, thanks.
You're retired. I think you have some extra time on your hands that you could probably volunteer your efforts to, if this,
I will give
for the
that,
greater good.
I will give that all the consideration it is due. Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, I'll come back to the table now.
I do just want to note that no residents of NDC were harmed in the making of this meeting. And were not slapped. It was just a hypothetical example. There were no staff fired or no persons harmed.
Thank you, Chris. It's probably important to make sure that that goes into this recorded meeting for however long it's on the web. Anybody else want to weigh in on the primary discussion?
So I think what I would be looking for would be some direction, actually for Nick. If there were going to be any changes to what the current process is, that we could then draft that and come back to a future meeting if you wanted to make any changes to what currently exists.
Nick?
I, I did include a retention period in a recent amendment to county board rule, allowing for electronic meetings. I think I said it at 120 days. Dan Dunbar and I have been reviewing some law on that and talking about retention in this context. I think the county board can set whatever time duration they wish to. However, state law does require that if the purpose of the recording is to make it easier for someone to do the minutes of the meeting, it's probably always an advantage to be able to resort to that. But if that's a purpose of the recording, then it has to be retained for at least 90 days. And then after that, it can be disposed of.
Supervisor Calabrese?
In your comment about education of committee chairs, I'm wondering, is there ordinance, are there rules of what can and cannot go into a closed session, or is that up to the chair of the committee?
Nick?
That's a fairly detailed, there are fairly detailed legal parameters for that. So there are specific statutory exceptions listed in the public meetings law or open meetings law. There is a reference to allowing closed sessions for meetings that will deal with the kind of information that, if it were a public record, wouldn't be disclosable. There are some federal statutes and other state statutes that require confidentiality with respect to some information that if it came to the committee. And so it's generally, if someone thinks there may be a reason to close, to conduct a closed session during a meeting, I am always happy to research the issue and offer an opinion about it, and then help draft the language that meets the requirements of the statutes about closed sessions, because there are some specific requirements on how you go into closed session, what happens, what kind of minutes have to be taken, how you come out of closed session, whether or not you can conduct business in the regular meeting after the closed session has concluded. But I'm always available.
Well, and I'll note when I talk about chair education and closed session, I'm not exempting myself. I've got a decent grasp on it after, 14 years of doing this, but it's been picked up in bits and pieces. And a more formal process, I think, would be, I would certainly benefit as much from that as anybody else at this table.
Mr. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Gary.
Supervisor Morehouse, then Supervisor Stee.
I'm perfectly willing on this issue to defer to the wisdom of my colleagues, but it just seems to me that Kelly is right about this being an unusual situation for most standing committees. And that for all of us to learn more about the rules and regulations of closed sessions, to go into closed session, rather than to have our staff engage in endless busy work, getting rid of videos that probably nobody's looking at anyway. So, but again, I'll defer to the wisdom of my colleagues. I would opt for option one, do nothing.
Supervisor Steen.
Yes, direct this at Sheriff Big or Chris or Nick. Are we concerned about some possible litigation arising out of what may happen at these meetings? Is that part of what is driving this?
Yes, and maybe lack of transparency. I have to be real careful about what I say, because we could get sued.
Well,
Talk about personal.
and the reason I asked that, if you had a person that had bad intentions, they have the opportunity to sit and study and study and study. And most of us are just laymen that conduct our meetings in good faith. And I can see the possibility of, if it's on there forever, that, if the wrong actor got it, it could be utilized in a nitpicking or a litigious way. Thank you.
Supervisor Prochnow.
Yeah, thanks, sir. I know on highway too. I mean, we're talking about contracts all the time and what we're going to put into them and why we didn't take one over another. And I don't know if we get in trouble for any of that stuff, but it's out there forever. I think even in highway, we're talking contracts all the time and why we didn't accept somebody, which I think is a liability too. So, and if we were going to delete them, I'd say a year at the most to keep anything. So.
I might suggest, as a possibility, if we were going to give direction on deletion, what we might do to make it less of a every month you have to go out and do it, is to put up we will retain them at least 1 year and no more than 3 years. So, every couple of months, someone has to go in and do it rather than being a kind of beats. Supervisors ons.
Hypothetical, but let's say that becomes like policy. We're not going to record meetings or something like that. What's to prevent somebody from showing up at a meeting and making their own recording?
Absolutely nothing. That's completely legal.
So
The only thing that you can remove them for closed session. But other than that, Supervisor Steen.
Yeah, Nick, would a primer on closed sessions for the executive committee or the whole board or all the committee chairman, would that be onerous on your part or?
No, in the past, so I've been the corporation counsel for a little over 10 years now. There are probably 3 or 4 times where a committee chair has come to me and asked me about it. And I prepare a little condensed version of what the law is, and even provide a checklist or talking points about how to go into closed session, what to say at the end of closed session, what, opening the doors back up and inviting people back in and all kinds of things. I have some scripts, I guess you could call them, that I could adapt for any committee if I know what the issue is. And I'd be perfectly happy giving you a 20-minute training on it at a meeting if that's what you'd like.
Supervisor Steen.
I think that would definitely be in order, and I think it would be in order as part of the package when new board members come on to have this included in their information.
I am working on the package for new board members and new committee members more or less as we speak. Yeah. So, what I'm hearing is that it would be useful to have probably a session at exec, because I think it's the chairs is probably the key. Because you are the people in charge of those decisions proximally. I'm thinking after budget. Because budget is going to be taking most of our time here for a little while. Do we want to think about a retention policy now, or do we want to have that discussion after the discussion on closed meeting? Okay, looks like consensus is we'll do a session, an educational piece on when it's appropriate to have a closed meeting. That may solve the problem entirely. And after we've had that session, we can come back and have this discussion again from a slightly more informed place. So probably December, January, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think that is a good idea, because my question was thinking that if I could relay that information to the sheriff and the DA and the courts and everybody, and then they could be more prepared and more used to prior to the meeting saying, I'd like to go into closed session. But if we learn in this tutorial that there's a lot of things that we can't go into there for, then that might influence how long we want to retain things.
Great, thank you, John. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, Supervisor Zons.
I'm just wondering if there's like a possible hybrid type of thing where you're still an open meeting, but you're just not recording it for sensitive portion of the meeting. So not quite closed. It's still open. Someone can still walk in, but it's paused during a sensitive discussion. I'm just throwing it out there for consideration.
I suspect that legally that's a little more dicey, but
I would say it's not per se illegal, but it does raise a, it raises a question in the mind of someone who maybe wasn't privy to the conversation as to why it was done. And
Because we were talking about them.
yeah, well, sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's true.
You don't know that because you frequently,
I
when you
mean,
zoom in, Jim, you miss a lot of cross talk about you.
Hear a lot of silence. COVID brought to us a whole new paradigm of how we do meetings. And I mean, this recording, live streaming and all of that was really primarily for the purpose of allowing the meetings to carry on, for the work to keep getting done during a time when we were not all allowed to be in the same room together. And there's no reason, I mean, there are no legal reasons to even record meetings at this time because that circumstance isn't present. It is handy. It's been recognized as being a good thing that makes the meetings accessible to constituents, to the media. We used to have a table with 3 or 4 reporters at every county board meeting, and now they watch the videos when they come up. So they don't have to drive all the way over here from Boyceville or Colfax to the bad weather or whatever. So there's some value to it, but it's not legally required. As long as the doors are open and there's a notice that the meeting is going to be held and it says the date, the time, and the room, and the address of the place, you have a sufficient notice of the meeting, and if someone wants to come to it, they may. And if they don't want to come to it, they don't have to.
All right. I think we've got a plan. So moving on, back to you, Chris.
All right, with that, I am going to turn the microphone over to Brian Della. Brian has 2 roles with us. Brian works for an organization called PMA, and they have been our, okay, so as you might recall from our conversations about all of our investments, we have money tucked away in a number of different spots. But one of them is a longer term investment vehicle that we have with Bremer Wealth, and PMA manages that for us. So Brian has been our investment advisor. Our PMA has been our best investment advisor. But recently, Brian approached us about some bond advising as well. And one of the things that he had done for some other counties was to have them take a look at their borrowing, and in answer to the question about how, like, what does borrowing do to our our mill rates? Kind of looking at how to answer that question and how much money could we borrow or not, and not affect or minimally, at best, minimally affect our mill rate. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and he's going to walk us through a presentation that he put together specific for Dunn County.
Well, thanks, Chris. It's good to be here. I will share
Give
my
me
screen.
2 seconds, Brian. I'm going to figure out how to make you big. You're little at the moment.
Okay.
Oh, never mind. You popped up largely. You're good.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks for the introduction. And Chris already talked about our first slide. Oops, was going to work. All right. Yeah, we do. We advise on debt issues, and we help units of local government with their investments. So, I was talking with Beata and Chris and had some understanding about what they thought that their, the amount of money they sort of had for their capital needs between the highway and general CIP. And, based on the operating levy and how that could be supplemented with debt. And they were, wanted to get a sense for, what that, what would really be the impact. So we started, the way these things typically start is I'll get some understanding of what, the county thinks is its sort of minimum amount that it might want to borrow or, to supplement capital. And then how could that be structured in a way that sort of has the minimum impact on the overall debt service levy and you know, what would really the impact be? And, you know, just what I'd like to reiterate, or I'd like to state, and I'll reiterate throughout the presentation, is this is just a first draft. You know, I essentially put this together without a lot of direction from the county. It's just I've done this for other counties. I think it's, you know, a good starting point. But this chart here shows it's an iterative process. You have to, you know, you have to let me know what your, you know, your policy goals and objectives are, and that'll drive in how much you're going to be doing for CIP, and then I'll look at how that'll turn into debt and debt service and how that affects your levy and whatnot. So consider this a first draft. When you the exhibit at the bottom of this page, you know, we're going to be looking at a levy model here and that's it's a full levy model, right? So we're going to be looking at your operating levy, and that's the green area, and that's subject to levy limits. You know, in other words, state statute limits your ability to increase your operating levy for the most part in an amount equal to the net new construction in any given year. And that's the green. And then the blue is the debt service levy. So we'll look at your existing debt, and we'll look at an example schedule of borrowings over the next 10 years. And then you add the green and the blue, and you know, your operating levy plus your debt service levy. And of course, your debt service levy is not subject to levy limits. So if you take out a note or a bond for a project, and you can always place that following year's debt service on the county's tax levy. And so when you add the operating plus the debt service, you get the county's total levy. First thing we have to do is, you know, look at your existing debt. So as this is the amount of debt you had at the start of the year, and of course you'll be paid some of that off already. I guess, in fact, considering the last, some of these have 10-1 maturities, you've actually paid all of 2023 off by now. But at the start of the year, you had these 6 issues had 32.655 million of outstanding debt. And for 2023, what you levied last year for this year was about $5,156,000. You kind of see that right there. Sorry. This is a chart of the debt service from the previous slide. As you can see, your, you know, 23, 24, 25, 26 are all about that around $5 million. And then there's a pretty a good drop in the annual debt service that of your existing 6 borrowings. So what this is, you know, this is very good, you know, and sort of what this kind of structure allows is for some regular annual or every other year borrowings to supplement your capital without necessarily, if you don't want it to happen, without necessarily needing to increase the amount of the county's debt service levy. And I'm sorry with these switching, my keys won't let me do it. So I'm like gently moving my mouse here to try to get to the next slide. So what I've done is I've looked at your existing debt, and I know you wanted to borrow at least 3 million on an annual basis. And then I looked at your about 5.2, 5.3 in annual debt service. And I thought, well, how much could you borrow? Basically, how much could you borrow every year and not increase it? So I came up with 10 years of annual borrowing, and there's nothing magic about these numbers. But the first couple of years I had the county borrowing 3 million each year. And then for the next 6 years, the county would borrow 4 million annually. And then the last 2 years of this 10-year cycle or 10-year projection, the county could borrow 5.5 million each year. And so the reason that the beginning, the years 3 and the first couple of years are 3 million and not not the average, what you just saw an average here of 41 million over 10 years is an average of 4.1 million a year. The reason that it's not 4.1 million, it could be 4.1 million every year, but we kind of started it off at 3 million, just hypothetically, right? Just because you've got a couple of years here where you wouldn't really be able to amortize any principal, and we'll show you what that looks like in a second. But that's why you'll get a little less up front, and then you get more over time. But if you needed more up front, we would just find a way to do it for you, because we do a lot of customized amortizations of principal. Oh, so here we are. So this is okay. So on the previous slide, you saw 10 years of just borrowing amounts, 3 million to 5.5 million. This actually shows the principal and interest payments in a custom structure for each of the 10 debt issues. There's just 3 million the first year, 3 million the second year, 4 million, et cetera, and then you go down the last couple of years, 10 years from now, 5.5 million, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because we only have what 3 million buys today, 3 million will not buy in 10 years. So the fact that it's growing is just probably just trying to keep up with just cost increases for construction projects. Now this is the chart. We saw the chart initially that had just your existing debt is this real dark blue. That's probably a little hard to see, but this very dark blue is your existing debt. And then we put this sort of royal blue on top of it. And as you can see, your annual debt service payment stays exactly at $5.3 million a year, all the way to 2034. So you can borrow that, $4.1 million annually, and the county's debt service levy, never increases beyond 5.3 million. And then if you wanted to, you could still continue this process going forward. You can see how the existing blue lines very close to the existing blue sort of bars are very close to what's right here is the perfect sort of this purple line is this sort of perfect 10-year downward sloping amortization line. So I think this is kind of the takeaway that what I put together and why I did this is as a baseline, and that is that you can borrow 4.1 million on average for the next 10 years, every single year, and your debt service levy does not need to increase beyond $5.3 million, which is just a hair more than where you are right now, just a hair more, because I think you're at 5,150,000 in 23. It goes down a hair in 24, and then we would just take you up just a couple $100,000, which is very small in a county's budget when you're able to levy for it. So that's the debt service projection, right? So remember in the levy model early on, the green part's the operating levy. And what this chart is, or what this table shows is, the operating levy is subject to levy limits. Most of it, 90 some percent of it. So what we have here is the general fund, human services fund, and public works. And you can see, we got 4 years of actual. So the 2020, 21, 22, and 23 are in there. And Beata gave me an estimate for the 2024 budget. And you can see that 20, it was actually decreased, but you've had some fairly modest increases, 1.1%, 1.6, 2.7, 1.6. But what I did for the projection is I just said, well, what would be a really conservative estimate of the county's net new construction on an annual basis? And I thought 0.7% was a pretty reasonable estimate for a conservative estimate of how much net new construction the county would have going forward. So what I did is I increased for 25 and thereafter, I just increased that at those annual amounts, those general fund, human services, and public works. I just increased it by 0.7% because you couldn't really increase by much more than that, just whatever your net new construction is. And then the library, there's a couple operating expenses that aren't subject to levy limits, such as library and bridge aids. But the library, I just grew at 1.5%. Just to be conservative, and then bridge aids, I just had them $50,000 a year and growing by 2%. A little higher than the 0.7, but not particularly significantly higher, especially on smaller dollar amounts. So that's the operating levy. So you saw the operating levy. Here's a consolidated version of the debt service levy, right? So you can see your existing in the dark blue, the 32,655,000. We know that's the existing at the start of the year. We know we're talking about adding 41 million. We've got just some fiscal agent costs, and then so this is the 5.3 million, which you'd be levying every year, right? For this period. So when you take your operating levy is only growing at 0.7%, and your debt service levy is not growing at all. It grows, it takes one little step up to 5.3 million, and then it stays there. So you've got a very slow growing in dollars, you've got a slow growing increase. But your mill rate would actually be declining. And I don't know by how much, but there's always a certain amount of inflation that just occurs over time with property values. A house that you bought 20 years ago is worth more today than it was 20 years ago. Or it is certainly on average that case. So what I did is so this is the total county levy here on the left, 3 or 4 years of actual, 24 budget, and then just a projection going forward. But what I did is so you can see the increase in the levy in dollars, very small, less than 1% here for much of it. But on the mill rate, I'm growing your equalized value at, in this case, a very conservative 1.7% a year. So I just assumed 0.7% for net new construction and 1% for inflation. So you get 1.7 total. So that would be how your mill rate, your equalized value would grow. That's the market value of the properties, the taxable properties in the counties. So right now, you're at current number is you have an equalized value less any TID districts, because there's a certain amount of increment in those TID districts. You don't get to keep that. That's segregated for a period of time while the TID's alive. But you've got a $4.9 billion in equalized value. So that's an estimate of the market value of all the taxable property in the county that you can levy your taxes on. 4.9 billion. So next year you'll have like 24.5 million levied over 4.9 billion equals a mill rate or a levy rate per $1,000 of equalized values of $4.97. So your mill rate's about $5. You have a property in the county, whatever its market value is based on the state's calculation. It's assessed value plus a factor. Excuse me. You're paying about $5 for county taxes next year. So as you can see, this is that chart again. As you can see, the county's levy is about 80% operating. All right, that green bar. And you got 4 years of actual, and then you got this projection. And then the blue, I've designed this so it stays the same every year. The blue is about, $5.3 million, and we're just going to stick in that area. Assuming you borrow on average $4.1 million on average each of the next 10 years. And then so you look at your overall percentage increase in the levy, just going forward here, it would be very modest if you're able, to sort of stick to this plan. And in the area of levy limits, there's only so much, the operating levy can't change much. And if you choose to structure your debt in a way and borrow in a certain way where you don't increase the debt service levy, then you'll have a very, very modest increases in the dollar amount of your levy. And then, of course, because I mentioned the values of properties go up faster than this, your mill rate, what your rate, per $100,000 would actually go down. So, I gotta grab this little thing. So, sorry, I gotta just stop sharing. I had to move my camera here a second, but that's sort of the extent of my presentation. And I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments or anything of that nature. Happy to answer anything I can.
All right, I will ask for questions. I'm going to frame this a little bit in that this is one possible projection that would allow us to keep things pretty steady. I suspect, given the needs that we've been looking at, our borrowing would actually come in lower than this, possibly substantially lower, but this is just entirely hypothetical at this point. All right, now, that said, anyone have Supervisor Steen?
Brian, at that borrowing level that you gave us as an example, what percent of it, of the total amount available for us to borrow is that? Do you know?
I didn't even include it in here because you're very, very low. It's not even close. You would legally be, well, I guess I could do the math here. So you have 5 billion in equalized value, and you're allowed to have 5% of $5 billion under the statutory limit. So I think that's $250 million of debt. And right now, basically, when you look at this, and I'm looking at I'm flipping through my slides here. Right now you're at 30. Right now you're at 32 million at the start of the year. At the end of the year, you're going to be at 28 million. And you would actually, under this plan, would be drifting lower because you would basically be hanging around this $32 million mark. In 23, you paid off 4.5 million in principal, meaning you could borrow 4.5 million and have the exact same amount of debt. 24, you're paying off 4.5 million, so you could borrow 4.5 million, you'd be paying off this, exactly what you're already scheduled to pay off. So, yeah, so I mean, to answer your question, you're not anywhere near your statutory limit, and what we're proposing would not even be essentially increasing. You'd be very, very close. You're really treading water. It's like a treadmill. You're paying off every year, about what you're putting on, and you're just treading along. It's a steady state condition, really.
Thank you, Brian. Supervisor Steen again.
Well, part of my question or thought on this is that if we were going to go ahead with capital projects, in other words, move the county forward, we have some fairly big capital projects coming in the future. Would we be better off to accept a higher percent of debt so that we could maintain or allow the county to progress on their capital needs?
Well, I guess what I'd say is this, what I put forth here, because I don't know the county's capital needs, right? So as a placeholder, I think, the county, in the back of your mind, you should probably be thinking 4.1 million a year on average, no tax increase. Okay. Now, if you turn out that you say, Brian, we're talking to highway, we're talking to the other public works, and I honestly think we're going to need about 6 million a year, or at least we're going to, or maybe the 3 or 4 million will work right now, but it's going to have to grow. You've got to grow that, to 6 million over time, and we can't stay at 3 and 4 forever. I'd say, oh, okay, no problem. Just let me know, kind of what you're thinking you'd like, what you'd need, what you'd need to fund your capital program, with debt. Because obviously, as we talked about, the green part of your 80% of your budget can only grow by net new construction. So that's very small. So if you tell me that, hey, we need 6 million starting in 2027, I'll be like, okay, I'll run the numbers, and then I'll be like, oh, well, you're gonna have a slight increase in your debt service levy. You know, it'll have to grow from 5.3 million to maybe, I don't know, 6 million over time. But it would be I mean, I understand, I think, you know, what county officials and staff would be probably interested in a very predictable, small increase every year in the debt service levy where where from a budget perspective, you know how much you're getting for capital. From a budget perspective, you know how much you're gonna have to levy for debt service. And there's no fluctuations. There's a long-term plan in place, and we're just doing these small incremental increases, you know, where, you know, essentially, for the most part, taxpayers would hardly notice it. But I do tell people, you know, you have a lot of capital here at a county. So whatever, you know, there probably is there's a wide range of how much you could spend, but there's probably a pretty prudent range of how much you should be spending. So it doesn't pay to spend less than what the minimum proper amount, right? Because you're just gonna have to, it's gonna come to bite a future board, or you know, you got a lot of assets, you got to maintain them.
That is certainly the case with our highways at the moment.
Thank you.
And Brian, I don't know if you would speak more eloquently to this. You kind of just said it, but the whole point of this exercise is try to look at what sort of stabilizes our planning.
Agreed. And you know, the thing about it is, you know, the way I've got this structured is that, look, if you want to borrow, you know, this is a plan right now, and let's just say the county decides to move forward with some borrowing. And you want to borrow 3.5 million this year and 3.5 million next year, something like that. You know, it's right in the wheelhouse of what have shown here. You know, I can keep your debt service at the 5.3 million. And then we can revisit it in a couple of years. And like, Brian, we need more than 4 million. So I'll be like, okay, well then now we'll, you know, if that's really what the board wants, we'll just start, you know, slowly increasing it by whatever that amount is, maybe 200 grand a year. So maybe it goes from 5.3 to 5.5. Maybe it goes from 5.5 to 5.7, or maybe we can even take smaller steps. Maybe it's $150,000 increase, not 200,000, but we'll work with you and we'll just come up with a plan that, you know, sort of meets your needs. But, you know, the idea is that, you know, we run 4.1 million a year. We run 6 million a year. You know, you can probably guess what 5 million is a year. It's right in the middle, right? So these things are all proportional. We can give you some options. But I mean, for me, I think that's the big thing. The big benefit is that, look, to be able to give your highway department and let them do long-term planning, let them know, okay, see the schedule here, 3 million, 4 million, you know, why don't you just assume this is what's going to come in debt proceeds and make your budgets based on this? All of a sudden, they're gonna have a lot better 5-year budgets, because they're gonna actually have a fair amount of certainty on how much, you know, sort of like supplemental revenues coming in. Plus there are other sort of other revenues from the operating side. So and then you'll be, you know, and your budget will be fixed, you know, for debt service. You don't have to worry about it. So I think you just do a lot. You'll actually be doing some planning instead of, you know, long multiple year planning, which I think is a lot more effective than 2-year planning, one year at a time.
Anyone else? All right, Brian, thank you very much.
All right. And, you know, obviously Chris and Beata will have a copy of the presentation if anyone wants a PDF of it.
And
Oh,
Brian will be
and
back for county board.
yeah,
And
and
we'll hear you live in person. Right?
yes,
Are you
that's
coming
true.
live in person? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct.
Looking forward.
So if anybody wants any edits to this between now and I think it's the 18th, I put it on the front cover of the presentation on the 18th. So you know, I could even run a different scenario. You know, you know, if you wanted to see an extra $1 million a year on that, what would that look like? You want to see 5.1 million for the next yeah, on average over the next 10 years. We can run that just as easy. It would just be, but you would see an increase at that point. So I think in some respects, I think a floor is 4.1 million. You just had to ask me. Because you don't want to, I'm kind of presuming, everyone would like to pay less in debt service, but I have a sense that you guys have some, like everyone, you got a lot of needs.
A lot of road and we need a new highway shop soon.
Now,
An expanded one.
well, as an aside, this model does not account for a highway shop. And
Oh, no.
if you
but-
wanted a highway shop, that's additive. But, if you let me know, I can model it. Those are tough ones to swallow, but but yeah, just let me know.
Great, thank you.
All right. See you in a week.
See you then.
Bye-bye.
All right. And with that, I believe that I am done.
Okay, I gotta find my agenda here again. All right. Let me put on seeing the laptop glasses instead of seeing all of you. Item 6, reports, resolutions, and ordinances to the county board from the executive committee. Review and recommendation of draft FY 2024 county budget.
With that, Beata is going to come up and walk you through that. And Dan's going to come up and tell me how to make this the right size.
There's 3 extra steps for everything.
Mhm.
You might be right about that. She had team meetings yesterday. That's what it was.
The only Microsoft product that I enjoy using at all is Word, and that's because I've been doing it for 30 years and I still hate it.
I use Word perfect.
I think about that, and I love Excel.
Publishing uses Word.
I thought you wrote out longhand. I thought you used hieroglyphics. I smoke cigarettes.
Smoke signals.
What do they do in Norway?
They write it on left side.
Oh, that's what I figured.
I thought it was the left side, man. Potato paper.
Kind of, I'm kind of like moving this around because something is wrong with my mouse. It just clicks all over. I don't know. I was hoping I could have a PDF in front of me and kind of go without twisting my neck too far. But I've also, I sent you a link to our Google Drive right prior to that. So I just dropped that PDF of this presentation there for you. And I also will do the same once Brian shares his presentation, and I'll put in that spot as well. So you'll have it as a reference there. So I have the intent of this PowerPoint presentation kind of pivots a little bit off of what Brian was talking about. So you'll see some redundancy, or let's just call it revisiting. What's kind of, based on how Brian kind of did that plan. Him and I will be working really closely together on looking at our future needs. Like, we do prepare CIP for 5 years. So this is something that he's going to come in and we'll work as a team to continuously get the boards up to speed. What is the debt repayment going to look like? So him and I and my team are going to be attached at the hip. Next slide, please. So we have some main objective to cover here is to just review the Dunn County funding sources and some of those disbursements. We also will touch base again on our levy limit, the debt, just really high level highlights. And we want to kind of inform you about our county general fund balance. What does that look like? Also, some of the assumptions that we've used in preparation of this budget.
And we also gonna, dive into some of the numbers, and we're gonna look at, you've already, when I'm referring to the department's program summary reviews, those you have in that Google Drive. So that's what this is kind of referring to. And then position requests. Okay. I think we're looking at the wrong slide. Okay. The wrong presentation. So this is the one that's actually on Teams that I have for you in the budget team. Yeah, this, I was just gonna say, it's like, didn't we? No, there's a new one there for you. This is our team. So we're this is a learning curve for us too. We're using this platform to share documents and management, so we don't have all these different versions circling around. So we have one document that we're working with. So even though it was a month-old presentation, but a lot of the objectives kind of remain the same for us to focus on. So we can skip through that first slide and get right into it. There you go. That's today's date. Thank you so much, Dan. All right. So objective little, what we were proposing for our budget. And then there are the executive committee actions. Next slide, please. So here is, I've highlighted the revenue sources, and I identified fund balance and identified a CIP, because we did that really in spring. We've got that passed, so that's pretty solid there. And I've also identified what that capital improvement and expenses is, and so I just want to make sure that's part of there. So we have a net variance of 7.678 mil. So now that has changed since last time you saw that presentation. Next slide.
Mr. Chairman, may I? So this document that I printed off from the Google Drive has a variance of 7.9.
So did you?
Is this more?
This is
Current.
more recent. So if you went to Google Drive today, you should see 7678. So
Got it.
it's still a live document that I keep updating as information becomes known.
Fine.
Okay. So our levy limit is
We go back and talk about why the number went up.
I have it.
Oh, you have it farther?
Yes,
Okay,
I have
sorry.
it further on as to say why is the difference, what took place. So it's just kind of reiterating our levy limits. Our preliminary levy limit is at that 23.7 million. And that's a slight increase to what we had last year. And then again, this is what Brian was talking about, the equalized value and how that gets into the equation. So our outstanding debt, that's that 32.65 million. So the question was where we are at with that, what we could potentially borrow. So that's out of 5% out of the equalized value that Brian was talking about. We can potentially borrow up to 214 million, and our general obligation debt makes up only 14.25%. So I think that was one of the questions that came up earlier. So as Brian and I are also looking and see, well, what is that going to do to our rating? It's going to have no impact. I mean, I don't want to say no impact potentially, but it's not going to make that rating go any lower, substantially lower. Next slide. So levy limit, oh, there we go. And here's our fund balance. So we had our audit done. So this is as of year end, December 31st of 22. So we have our general fund is at that 19.27 mil. But out of that 19, 14.18 is unassigned fund balance. So the difference here between the 19 and the 14 is those that we've recognized that those are the carry forwards that were done or could be restricted, money that we cannot touch because they've been assigned to something else already. Okay. So our percentage of that unassigned fund balance right now, it's at that 56.64%. And the recommended again is that 25 to 33. So how we ended the year 2022 is that there was a transfer back to the general fund of that 2.195 million. And keep in mind that that also includes anything that's assigned. So, or anything that we've already committed or were done through carry forward. So just keep in mind, human services contribute makes up that number at 597 and the rest is just left over from other departments. Next slide. So here what it's very small to see, but I wanted to show you a trend all the way back to 2012. How our activities transferred in and out. What that column represents is any money that was when we closed the year, what was left and was put back into the fund balance. And if we ended the year with our operating budget, whatnot, with a deficit, this is what we've taken out of our fund balance. So that's what that column represents. So on the percentage wise, that percentage which says the unassigned fund balance to the general fund, just wanted to kind of give you an idea how we've been trending to our expenditures, and that's the column next to it. So for 2022, our expenses were about that 25 mil. So that 5%, I'm sorry, that our unassigned fund balance is really off of that number. Okay, but that's only our general. That doesn't include your highway. That doesn't include the debt payments and all that. So at the very end is just kind of trending like how we've been doing what we are allowed to have for debt based on equalized value. And we right now at that 14 and a quarter based on what we have outstanding. And this is again per audit because 2023 is on the previous slide. Okay, so here's some of the assumptions that we've made, just to kind of revisit. Some of the assumptions that are in this budget is that we did there's a compensation mid-grid 2% increase. Also a step move to 1 and 0 increase to any of our health insurance benefits. And we also estimated a wage variable of $2.06 million. So that is the wage variance. That percentage is based on at any given time, what are we actually paying in wages and versus what was budgeted? Because staff turnover, and there might be people that are all staff turnover, leaving and coming and going, that types of, and if they've been with us for many years and they decide to leave, they might be getting paid at a higher rate than what we actually would hire. So that's what that really represents, is that wage variance. So here is what had happened from last time we met to what it is now. So a couple things have transpired. So one, last time we met, there was a direction about decreasing some positions. So I've highlighted them there. We eliminated one position that was requested from the sheriff, and I think that's the recreational. We eliminated one position request in admin, but instead it was replaced by flat $25,000 to offset some of those wage additional time that might be needed. And we also updated one human services position request not to start mid-year. The other thing that also had happened is that Wisconsin Department of Transportation has rules, I should say guidelines in reference to accounting and finance that also kind of is aligns or needs to align with the general accepted accounting principles. So what does that mean for highway? So that means for highway, we relooked at our, I'm gonna call them transactions or our fund. So we also reached out to a consultant to help us navigate some of those complexities within those manuals and to make sure that we are recognizing expenses and charging them to the appropriate funds. Because highway is considered an enterprise fund. So think of it as it's there to make money in the form of a business. So with that, per the manual and per sitting with our constructions, we updated the highway department budget to reflect added expenses for equipment and small tool rental costs for projects that are county and Bear Bridge construction specific, county, state roadway and winter maintenance and local governments, not state. Okay. So any questions on this topic?
So I think that's going to require a little bit of
A little bit more?
a little bit of
Okay, a little bit more juice
explanation.
in there. Okay.
So I know Dustin's here. He left? Oh, okay. All right. I mean,
No, okay, so I can,
Go ahead.
I mean, I've sat down with Dustin many, many, many times. So what this represents is that when we do a plow snow at the county, so we really don't have an invoice that we're gonna invoice for plowing, right? It's our county, it's paid by taxpayers. But we also are using equipment. We are using equipment that we've already bought. So part of the cost of doing that plowing job is you're utilizing machine that we already have and bolts and nuts and tires and grease and all that. The state tells us what rate are we allowed to charge for those. So the practice is, in other counties as well, is that we would account for that cost of using our machine, that it's paid through other funding other than debt. And what, as we pay ourselves, we would then, any excess revenue would then build our highway fund balance. Does that help a little? Or lost you guys?
well, so essentially, the consultants that we've been working with on highway have recommended that we set up a county highway and bridge fund. And essentially, we would put our levy, county levy that's in highway would go into that fund. Our vehicle registration fee would go into that fund. Any other random reimbursements that come to the county for doing county work. And essentially, we would draw out of that fund as we had expenses related to plowing and county road fixing. So when we're fixing our own roads, there's no other form of funding. We're going to draw it out of that fund. When we plow our own roads, we're going to draw it out of that fund. But part of that, what we're drawing out of that fund is the use of our own equipment. So that eventually we're creating an ability to replace our own equipment is
Putting
really the
aside.
ultimate.
Putting
ultimate
funds
goal.
aside, right? Because at one point in time, that's what was happening. And then it changed, meaning that those costs were eliminated or excluded from the budget. And then when I came, we revisited that and we actually budgeted. And then we made a decision, well, maybe there was a reason why it was done in the transition and a lot of being new to the highway and a lot of staff turnover. So we've excluded these costs. Now we're revisiting this and our consultant says, no, you should be including that part of that cost. So that doesn't mean that we'll necessarily will go borrow money to pay ourselves. Because we've already took out a loan for a truck And you can't go take another $25,000 on a truck because we're using it for that year. Okay? So that's, I want to make that sure that, I just want to make sure that we're differentiate those two.
Supervisor Steen.
Yeah, I direct this to Beata or maybe Randy. Is that where the $1 million shortfall came?
Right,
Okay.
right.
Yes, essentially
Actually-
that's the cost of us using our own equipment,
Right.
in a sense, charging ourselves to use our own equipment.
And actually it was a little higher than million, but Dustin had the opportunity to go through all the other expenses. So that kind of rolled all together and he was able to find savings as more information became available. Yeah, which is the next slide is that as we're kind of moving, next slide, it's very liquid type of a live document. So I'll keep updating as information becomes available up until we actually are ready to run with the budget. So that also, the updates were with state revenue and we've updated some of the expenses. We also analyzed all vacant positions that are eligible for benefits. And then how are we going to budget for those vacant positions that we have relative to their health benefits. So typically, as I came from another training, any vacancy was family. Let's just budget family. So those can add up fairly quickly. So for us, it was worthwhile to analyze this. This was presented to you last year. I relooked at this data this year and it's right on. We were pretty consistent. So I applied that methodology since out of that population that's eligible for benefits, meaning eligibility around full-time, wouldn't be eligible for certain part-time. So that pool of the population that we identified as a vacant and based on our existing population that is here and what their take for benefits was that 15, as I said here, 25%, 50% of that is family, 25% is single, and 10% don't choose not to take our health insurance.
Supervisor Kinnear.
Thank you. So is that second part of the wage variance that we're assuming?
No, it's not part of that too, because what it is, our, how can I say this without and confusing you? When I prepare, no, it's excellent question. When I prepare the payroll report, we have a lump sum that we recognize as wages, and that's insurance and all those assumptions already built in there. So it's taking that pool at that time and then applying the wage variable. So yes, it does on the back end, but not on the front end. Make sense? Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the simple way of saying this is basically, we looked at our existing population, how many of them take our health and benefits and at what level, and we applied it to our vacancies. So that we were giving an accurate, because a family health plan is roughly $30,000. So if we budget for a $30,000 and they end up taking none, we've over budgeted by $30,000.
And I was looking at 3 years worth of data. So it wasn't just one event. So I still had data from last year when I was doing the analysis and I added to what it is in comparison now and how is that trending. So some of the budget actions to kind of consider as you're digesting a lot of this information. So and again, as of the end of 22, we have that unassigned balance, just kind of brought it forward here. So right now we're on that percentage of 56.64. Also, we have a resolution in place, our fund balance policy. And it states that, we intend to remain the unassigned fund balance at no less than 35% and no greater than 50%. So then I calculated, well, what would that mean if we drop 6.64? So that would be $1.662 million that could potentially can be considered to balance the budget. So I throw in, this is, my colleagues give me a lot of feedback on these slides. And maybe now I kind of think this is a little bit out of order because now I'm back to the wage variable, right? So here I'm just kind of showing you a trend, how we've calculated that wage variable. What you see on the bottom is really our actuals from 2021 and 22. And for 2023, I'm really using a projection. And those are pretty good projections because we are way into the year. So I feel comfortable. So as you're saying, it's the last 2 years, we've been at that 1106, this 1117. So now what we applied is very conservative, going back to 2020, even though we're trending a little bit higher. You know, I think HR had done various presentations about retaining staff and recruiting staff and what is the market like and what is the workforce looking like. So this kind of speaks a little bit to that number because it is hard for us to fill some of those positions that we have. And keep in mind that that includes NDC.
And I would just note that sometime back, like more than a decade, I would say back, the county actually used to just budget on 95% of its projected salary and fringe rate, even way back in the day, because we always had a certain number of vacant positions at any point in time, or someone leaves and they maybe that position isn't refilled for another couple of months and you have some savings. And so what we're doing it isn't out of the realms of what's happened historically, or what we're suggesting to do anyway.
Supervisor Kinnear.
So for 2022, does the 11.06% mean that
That is
total, wait, I'm still thinking, does that mean that the total amount spent was only 89% of what was budgeted?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, essentially you see the budget line of 43 million, the actual expenditures of 38 million. The difference was $4.7 million that went unspent.
So here's some takeaways for you as you again going through the numbers and trying to look at some of the options. We have this budget gap of 7.678 mil. Now, if the option here be to apply wage that variance and some of the items we talked about, if we took our fund balance down to that 50% to what it is now. Also, there is apply debt fund balance. Now, this is the only time you probably see this out of this whole presentation. So what that is, this is really money left over from monies that we borrowed and what we've paid, and this is just remaining money that, but we can spend it, but only either paying an interest or for a project that the debt was intended for to begin with. Okay, because we borrow 3 million, but projects we might not spend all that 3 million. So that's the leftover that can be used to spend it. And what we still need for projects is 3.58, which kind of, would be, we would need to have other sources of funding other than what's presented here as an option.
Everyone needs to invoke your photographic memories to remember the slide, because there's really only, I believe, one more slide. The next slide kind of gives you what you need to consider, and we can pop back and forth as you need between these two.
So options is really revisit the new position requests. So what I've uploaded for you on the Google Drive, I've already updated, revised it based on the direction we had last month. Also revisit and look at the wage and fringe changes. Increases to the 2% or, however you might want to option to revisit. And it's just look at our operating budget and look at for some ways to reduce what was proposed. And then option is also applying the unassigned fund balance that we have now per the resolution that I kind of referenced here for you. If you need a copy of that resolution, let me know and I'll drop it in the Google Drive. Because, you need a lot of documents in there. And then there's also consider debt issuance. And then our last one is, let's just then apply that remaining debt service fund proceeds that we have that I've shared with you on the previous slide. And then the last one is a person with a question mark. Explanation mark. And so any questions? I know I realize it's a lot of information. And I was trying to get that Google Drive updated for you as soon as I could. But that is a lot to go through.
Supervisor Vogel.
I'm not sure how to ask this question, but I'm wondering when a department asks for a new position, is that position then written in stone? Or I mean, like their FTEs in that department? So like is each department given a certain number of full-time equivalents? Certain number of positions, they're like, these are the positions. And so like you couldn't just say, okay, this department has this many people, so that you wouldn't need to budget for this weird vacancy. Because I think someone brought it up last month, that if in the perfect world, if we fill all the vacancies and add all these new positions, how sustainable is that over the long run? So it's like, can we budget like FTE so then we don't have to worry about these new positions and the variance? Or I don't know if that makes sense.
So I've kind of answered this a little bit. This isn't kind of answering, that's not an answer, but meant to be an answer. So a couple of thoughts. One, having been involved in public service for 38 years, I always loved the phrase that, well, we've never had any money. So we've kind of never had any money, and yet government has continued to grow, and somehow we've continued to sustain that cost. So that's the simple answer. But the other practical answer is that it's so difficult because the funding streams are so diverse. So it's so difficult to like hold to a particular number of people, because you could eliminate a position that would literally save nothing. Or you could add a position that would cost its entire position in levy. So I think that our best future forecasting is based on our historic trending, and our historic trending over the last few years, 4 years essentially. I mean, even back to 2020 and going back, I think we've gone back previously as far as about 10 years, and we've never fallen below that at least 5% rate, just because we have 500 some employees. So, I know that's not a direct answer, but I think that we will never be fully employed.
Well, and I think one of the things that we have to think about in terms of a very large budget, it's not huge by county standards, but it's a big chunk of money for all of us, is to a certain extent, there's just a lot of guessing. I mean, it's highly educated guessing, but Supervisor Kinnear.
More questions. Now, the top one, new position request reduction, we talked about the last time. I'm totally comfortable with it. I'm only asking if we eliminated all of those, it's not all that much, is it?
No.
How much?
A little over
A
$400,000.
little over $400,000. Okay.
And that's part of that wage variance. So I took that pool of all our salaries, including those new positions, and from there I built in. So hopefully that helps.
I don't see anything on the first four that really helps with 7 million. Am I not understanding this too well?
Well, you don't need 7 million. You need 3.5,
3.588.
Yeah.
right?
Assuming that. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I jumped in.
Right. Assuming that you would then consider those options I had on the previous slide, assuming that you would agree to apply the wage variable, assuming then you would say, yes, use up what's remaining in the debt fund balance of that 300, let's apply that and spend it. And then bring our fund balance down from what it is now to 50%. So assuming, considering that if you're gonna consider all the options up above as that, then you have that 3.5 million to, or if you round it, 3.6 million to work
Right.
with.
Okay, Diane, did you have something?
No, what I was gonna do is sort of walk us through that
Okay.
we're not at the 7.
Okay.
0.678, we're actually, assuming that these
Mhm.
reasonable suggestions are adopted, we're back to 3.6.
And
Okay,
the only other point to point out would be that, so, 1, 2, 3 are viable options. If you want to consider them, they are not without complications, but they are options. 4, really, if you use the $1.6 million, you take your fund balance to 50%. And you can make a decision to go lower than that and still stay within the policy that you just passed down to 35%. And I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that that is one of your options.
yeah, I think based on having passed the policy, we can assume the 1.6, and there is a discussion to be had about the
Right.
beyond that. So Supervisor Prochnow and then Supervisor Headland.
Yeah, not promoting this either, but what is the difference between 35 and 50% and how much money are we talking about in there?
If you were to decrease the fund balance below that
I'm
50%,
just, because our policy is
yeah,
35, so
we
I,
Oh,
calculated
we
that number.
calculated it.
It's
We
like-
went to 45. We went from 50 to 45. And did you pop that in a slide?
No, I didn't. I put it in my back pocket and down the way here, I've lost it.
Well,
I mean,
6.5,
It's in my computer.
6.5 is 1.6. So if we knocked it down to 45, that'd be like another 1.3, 1.4.
No, I think the total, if you take it to 45, I think it ended us up at about 2.5 million, between
Yeah.
2.4 and 2.5 million.
so that's almost another. million.
Another million. Is that what you just said? I'm sorry if I
No, you,
spoke over you.
pretty
Yep.
much.
Yeah.
You calculated the total number, I calculated the percentage.
Yeah. It's about another $1 million.
Okay, Supervisor Headland.
Chris, I know you had a number for us before on what 1% increase on top of the position bump was in terms of wages.
It was
Each
400.
percentage point is just a little over $400,000.
Again, not a
But if you were to go down from 2 to 1%, right? Right. And again, it's something to, again, I'm not advocating or try to persuade you to make any decisions, but we've created tools to help us monitor our actual expenses and projections. Now, we looked at the tool and it kind of worked out to the point where let us know a little bit ahead of time the audit where we might be looking at. I tested the tool against our audit report. So then next time I'm standing here, when I'm speaking to those numbers, I'm able to have a truth of source to test my tool against. So the way we've been kind of trending in how we have those savings or that we put back. This year in 2023, we said we might borrow, was it $900,000? And we project that we might not need to borrow that money.
Well, we project we won't need to.
If we project, we might, did I say that? Or
You
did
said we might not need to. We
oh,
project
yeah,
at this point in
double-
time that we don't
double
need to borrow that
negative,
money.
Yes. double negative. But no, exactly.
Okay.
So again, I want us to be, think of it as being conservative, not pressing it too tight to the line. But
Yep.
something to think about.
Supervisor Steen.
Yes, if we took the whole shortfall away from the 56%, what percentage would that leave us at?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
If we took 3.5, if we were looking for another 3.5 million,
Yeah, and we would reduce our
Oh,
balance from 56 to
got it.
whatever, what percentage would it be?
oh, well, that would, where it will drop us.
let me, give us a minute, we'll calculate it.
I think that,
Dan, can you calculate it?
I think that'd take us below 35, just eyeballing it.
What?
That was a good question.
Well, just the,
No, you don't need the whole, you just needed 3.5, another 3.5 million off of the 1 point, or in addition to the 1.6 we're already taking.
like, I think it'd take us down to about 32.
You take 14 million down 5 million, so you get 9. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would get us way below the 20, the recommended.
And the left is 24.
So we would take 14, we have $14.1 million of unassigned fund balance. We would use the 1.6 would take us to 50, and we need another 3.5. So that would be 50 or 3.5, 4.5, 5.1 million. So yep, 14.1 minus 5.1 million is 9 million. And then we would divide that by the roughly 25 million.
Oh, our expenses.
Yeah, yeah,
So actually it's on the slide there. You can
back up to it.
back into it. So yeah, we would
Yeah,
take,
it's 25 million essentially. Um.
Hmm.
36%.
Yeah.
So, and our recommendation is 35 to 50.
and such a,
less than 35.
Yeah, and this is, would leave us at the shade over 35. Is that about right? Yeah. Thank you.
Right.
So one of the other considerations, just again, not advising you, just giving you things to think about, is one of the things that I know that you've discussed previously when it comes to borrowing. So keeping in mind the when we borrow money, we don't begin to pay it back right away. There's a lag in there, and so depending on the timing of borrowing, we are quickly approaching the point in terms of borrowing where our debt service will go down, and subsequently so will our tax levy rate, or that we have to levy for, and just to think about what you want that to look like, because I think this is my opinion, it's more painful to drop it and raise it than it is to keep it level. And so that's just a consideration to think through as you're thinking about borrowing is, do you want to create that sort of sustained number that gets, that is updated by our equalized value numbers? So it probably drops the mill rate slowly. Or do you want it just to drop because we borrow less money and then at some point in time as you need, then have to raise it back up? That's kind of the balance.
Well, and it's also worth considering what we are borrowing for. In this case, we are largely talking about a big, heavy, durable asset. I mean, we're talking about the highways. And that leverage is another $7 or $8 million of state and federal funding. I mean, if we're going to borrow, there are a few easier cases to make for borrowing than to borrow for highways. Yeah, I may have been as a highway chair for a while. Supervisor Headland.
Yeah, and I guess, and I guess for me, this is a plus for borrowing. even with assigning the things that we're talking about, all the great work that Beata and Chris and everybody's gone through, that if we are, what it's doing for us is making us more accurate in our projected actual expenses for 2024. Which means that we probably won't have a $2 or $2.5 million leftover amount at the end of 24 to put back into increasing our balance. So if we decide, oh, yeah, the solution is to go all the way down to 35, 36% in our balance, and all the other numbers that they're projecting are quite accurate, that's where we're going to be. We're not going to be building that back up again. And so I'm all for this. I'm all for accurate numbers and budgeting, but being inaccurate and making sure we've had enough has allowed us to build that fund balance up. And so a better scenario is we went through this process a number of years ago very distinctly and realized that at that point, borrowing $3 million for a 5-year plan would actually reduce our mill rate in terms of paying our borrowing back and would give us a good upside towards funding the highway department the way it needed to be funded. And so we've done all of that. I don't know that we want to crash it and slap a one-time Band-Aid on it by taking down the general fund, and then what do we do next year? And so a lot of truth in what Chris was saying about keeping that level. I like the plan that we discussed earlier with the associate that was giving us some advice. That's where I'm at. Thank you.
So what I'm hearing is we are, I think, strongly considering bringing it down to what would be probably 47-48%, which would leave about 3 million in borrowing for the roads. Is that?
Note to myself, reduce the fund balance below 50% to,
So I think what I'm hearing, and well, I'll need a motion here at some point, is shoot for about a $3 million borrowing and bring the fund balance down. And I think just off the top of my head, it'd be like 47-48%.
got it.
It might be 46, but I think 47 and
Yeah,
change.
the gap we have was at that 3.6, so whatever difference is 3 million borrow, and the remainder is take it out of the fund balance. In addition to what we said would bring us to that 50%.
Yep.
Got it. I can do the math.
Supervisor Steen.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of the old Fram oil filter commercial. Pay me now or pay me later.
Was that when TV first started?
Black and white.
I think
That is
radio.
a savage comment.
Supervisor Prochnow.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds good what we're trying to do here, but, we already did cut a bunch off of highway. Dustin did a good job.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he cut a lot of maintenance off there just to get it down to this number that we're seeing now. And that's basically not some maintenance that we had to cut and a road that we're not going to fix like we normally would fix. Long term, I'm just looking at the highway. This is going to be an issue every year. If we're looking at the 5-year plan here, and it's like every year it's going to be this much. It's not going to go away. I would like to see some long-term planning for highway expenses, because to do less than 20 miles of road, our expenses are going to be this high every year.
Yeah.
Just to put that out there. And that doesn't include the CIP funding that we have to do every year too, so.
So what's unique about highway is how we're working with the consultants and how we have these separate funds, as Chris described. We'll gradually put money away to replace our equipment. So the goal is, in the future, we won't be taking out debt to buy a plow. We're gonna start building that fund So eventually, so we can replace. If borrowing it would come into play, would be more for those construction type of projects. So what Brian, when him and I said, we've kind of, Chris and I says, what would be that sweet spot? What would be the spot that's not going to take us, compromise or put us in the financial burden or the taxpayers, not compromise our credit rating, stay healthy, but within reason. That is why we looking at financing, looking out a little further, what would that look like if we were to borrow? So the sweet spot that he said was about that averaging $4 million. It's not saying that we go borrow 4.1 mil, but that would be like our sweet spot. We can go below it, but maybe it's just not go above it. But with that in mind, what he demonstrated is what would that mean to the taxpayer? And the mill rate, what's happening to the mill rate over time?
And it seems to me that that was a very reasonable modeling for our potential costs going forward. Yeah, it's a good, reasonable, conservative plan. We may have to, again, we've got the expansion of the highway shop that we're going to be looking at and a couple of other issues. And I do think you're right. We have to have that discussion about the longer term funding for highway. I am, however, going to hold us to today's agenda, which is solving this particular problem. And we always have the problem of every 2 years, there's a certain amount of supervisor turnover. We can only obligate next year's board to do a few things. So that's, part of the discussion in terms of long-term planning. That's one of the inherent weaknesses of the system.
And just kind of a reminder, in terms of the timing. So, for next week's county board, we'll come forward with whatever your recommendation is. Obviously, they're not voting on a finalization at that point in time, but, we then go to publication of our numbers the next day. So, so this is kind of the crunch time in terms of solidifying what we believe. It's not that you can't change it, because you can, but, we're trying to get it honed in as close to as what we can for publication.
And we didn't, obviously, we're not gonna do a resolution recommendation. Okay, my recommendation to this group would be our previously stated numbers, and that is that we would borrow up to $3 million as needed, and that we would take the additional shortfall, what it might be, out of fund balance along with the 1.66 that we've already saw. And those numbers, Brietta and Chris or whoever will put together for us for our board meeting next week. Is that correct?
And you can make that actually, it is get slated for,
Yeah, it's an action.
for
item.
action item, so you can actually make it in the form of a motion.
Yeah, I
if
was
you
going to
wish.
ask for a motion here in about 10 seconds. So,
My motion.
all right, Supervisor Headland, do I have a second? Supervisor Morehouse. Supervisor Vogel, did you have another question or comment?
I had one question. I was a little confused about the highway paying ourselves, that whole accounting. Is that just
I
county
second it.
money?
I was just about to say the same things. I don't understand at all
Like, so
what that was all about.
so what kind of fund are we putting it into? And like, I don't know. It just was unclear.
Okay, so if you think about the fact that, if you think about our county maintenance, plowing, fixing county roads, if you think about that, like, kind of like a business, right? We essentially, the county is a consumer of the highways, provision of those services. And so the highway department buys a plow or whatever, and then we essentially are paying our portion of what it costs to use that plow, the kind of the rental of that plow. We're putting that away because eventually the highway's going to have to buy a new plow. And if we don't put it away, then we're gonna come back and we're gonna borrow more money for a new plow.
Okay.
So-
Yeah, I was gonna say, to simplify, having been highway chair a while back, with highway equipment, we think in terms of operating hours. So if we are using a piece of equipment for a state project, we charge the state X amount per operating hour. And this is essentially a way of keeping track of the operating hours that we are using. So we are charging ourselves for those operating hours and putting that into essentially an equipment replacement fund that allows us to replenish so it's mostly a change in the way it's being accounted. We've always done it, but we're looking at it in a different way, and that's changing how it's budgeted. Does that?
And I think it's setting it aside, it's clarifying, it's setting it aside. Otherwise, it has the potential of just getting sort of sucked back into those ins and outs of kind of general fund balance. And this is a way of setting that aside specifically as for highway.
So me using the term pay ourselves, that doesn't mean that we can then use that money and pay wages for another department. This would be specific assigned to purchase replacement that's not going to go to the general fund or unassigned fund so that it's can be used for other purposes.
Supervisor Headland, then Supervisor Steen.
Okay. Basically what we're talking about doing, my daughter does for a private, construction company. And they call it funding depreciation. If that makes sense. They fund their depreciation on the same basis. Sheriff Big does it with his patrol cars. Basically, that's, it's in there. Okay, and so, you're saying this plow's gonna wear out after 2,000 hours of use. And so therefore, this much money is charged to our outside payers. But if we don't hold up our own end on the depreciation, we have nothing to pay for that plow with.
And this is why we have a certain number of plows that are old enough to drink. Or at least part of why. Supervisor Steen.
Where do you get the money to pay for the cost of paying yourself for the rental?
That was that extra $1 million
Yeah,
that we just built into the budget to pay ourselves. So if you think again of the county as a consumer of highway, even though the county sort of owns highway, but if you think about it as like if the highway department were its own separate entity sitting out there and they get out this money, we're gonna buy services from them. And part of that was that $1 million we're using to buy use of the plow, use of the dump truck, use of the whatever other stuff highways use.
So my question is, where do we get the 1.5 million next year then?
Well, that's again, mostly next year's problem.
Well, I think at some point in time, because most of what we do is a service, it's really not a business, it's a service. And so at some point in time, to furnish the service to our taxpayers, we'll run out of these accounting gimmicks, I'll call them, and we'll eventually have to raise taxes or cut services.
I believe that was the point of the discussion of the ongoing borrowing, is to try and figure out how to sort that out.
I understand that, but I'm a little thick on this. It appears we're the right hand's paying the left hand, but where are we getting the money in the first place? From the taxpayer.
So a couple of additional thoughts that go into that are directly related to that. One, keep in mind, this isn't going to solve all the world's problems, but keep in mind that by the time that we get to planning for the 2025 budget, we will have some revenue to account for from the solar project, about $1 million, a little under $1 million of that. And secondly, that the legislature just applied a fix to shared revenues, which are based on our sales tax, the sales, how well the state does will help us. If things continue to go well, we will have more money next year than we have this year. In addition, our investments stay strong. I mean, we're still at that 5+% on all of our investments. And our sales tax revenue continues to grow every single year. So kind of back to your question, Supervisor Vogel, how do you afford these things ongoing? Because those other revenue sources continue to grow over time. It's not perfect, but it is all works into becoming a part of the equation as to how you continue to fund these things ongoing.
Oh, and yeah, and Gary, I absolutely agree that we also have to worry about next year. But the job of this committee at this particular moment is not that. I mean, I totally think that's a part of the ongoing discussion. We'll be discussing that at the CIP. But as the guy in charge of the agenda, I'm gonna pull us back to recommendations for staff for this year's budget. But go ahead.
Well, I apologize for being a little thick on the subject, but I agree. I mean, I'm in favor of what we're proposing here. It's just that I'm not intending to leave this mortal coil in the next year. So if I'm back here next year, we'll be,
Absolutely.
and well, I'm in favor of it.
Well, and I will note from my point of view that the discussion Monday that I was having with Chris did not include the new highway numbers. So, the 2.2 to 3.5 was a little heart stopping for me too. But I think we have a plan for the moment. So, if anyone else has any discussion relevant to the motion on the floor, now is the time. Sure. The motion is, so all first of, we're keeping the first four. Actually, can you back up to the money slide, one back? Right. So we're applying the wage variance, we're applying the general fund balance, we're applying the debt fund balance, still needed for projects 3.588. We're gonna take the 588 out of general fund 2.251824. Okay. Would then be the number for the debt fund balance, which will bring us down to something right around 47%, leaving about 3 million for borrowing. Now, that's an approximation because we're gonna get more expenses and more revenue coming in, but this is what that was Vaughn's motion. Anyone else? All right, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. You have your direction. Okay.
Pretty hard.
6C, court request to transfer health insurance to IT equipment.
The Polish interpretation.
Hey, Chris, who's going to talk about the court request? Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
I'm sorry, did you address the budget adjustments and I was talking to Nick?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I jumped ahead one. My apologies. Let's just do 6C and then we'll come back and do 6B.
It is a budget adjustment, right?
Yeah, court
It
request
is.
to transfer health
Budget
insurance.
transfer, yeah.
I can't tell you the source of, the source of the funding is healthcare money. They are moving that to IT equipment. They are going to be purchasing to these Zoom rooms, which is how they are, if a person is in the jail or in other places, this is how they remotely participate in court. That was some equipment that was purchased a long time ago and is old, outdated, and needed to get replaced. So they are looking to do that, and this is how they're looking to get the money.
All right, so I would need a motion to approve that budget adjustment. Supervisor Zons moves, Supervisor Morehouse seconded. Just a little bit quicker off the draw than you, Gary. Any further discussion? Hearing none? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay. 6B, ACB. Apparently I am not, in fact, doing great at my alphabet today. 2023 budget adjustments, Sheriff's Department and Administration, CJC. Who is going to address that one? If we, I mean, they're usually pretty routine. Great. Does someone want to make a motion then? Supervisor Headland moves. Supervisor Calabrese seconds. Any further discussion or any question for Sarah? No, this looks like a room full of people who want to vote. All right, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Supervisor Morehouse?
Supervisor Johnson and I were wondering who this gentleman is next to the county clerk.
I think he's an escapee from the jail.
I can't see the name.
It's Doug Armson. He's a jail sergeant.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right.
Captain, jail captain.
Okay. All right, on to item 7, review of reports, resolutions, and ordinances coming to the county board from the standing committees. Committee on Administration, we have a bunch. Supervisor Headland. Microphone, please.
This is a situation where we had a request from our clerk, I believe, on this one. And to standardize rates for marriage licenses across the state of Wisconsin, so that the law has changed, and if you want to go get your marriage license in another county than what you're going to be married in, you can now do so. So the rate is going to go, I believe, to $100. Is that not correct?
Andrew is nodding yes.
Yeah, okay. And so that's the purpose of it, is to standardize, to match up to what the new law and regulations are for getting marriage licenses. Questions?
Doesn't look like it.
Let's see here. What else do we got? We already approved the budget adjustment for CJCC.
Health benefit premiums?
Health benefit premiums. If you have some questions, I could bring Jenna up. Those are the premiums and adjustments we plan to make for the 2024 year for the employees.
You may not have to move. Does anyone have?
And they are much better in terms of what's going to happen for the employees. We're able to lower deduct family and self deductibles, keep rates in mind and in line, and basically offer a much better health insurance package for our employees, due to all the hard work that our Human Resources Department have collaborated and put together. So if you want to know any more about that, we do have our Human Resources Director here.
Does anyone want to make Jenna move and come up and talk? You were off the hook on that one.
Thanks, Jenna.
Amending employee handbook, night differential.
Okay. There's an issue that came up. Apparently our highway department in the state must have decided to work a little bit. And they, it came up with the fact that Dunn County, like many counties, the traffic level in this county is greatly increased. And so having assigned work where they say, okay, Dunn County, we want you to go out and patch a spot underneath the overpass near Menominee. And we want that concrete cut out, new concrete poured in. Well, if we do that at, especially 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday, not a good deal. Obviously, I don't think any of us would even go near the freeway. So they've said there is a state law that says that kind of work can be moved to and be required to be done between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. in that 12-hour period. And so that means our crews doing that kind of work will have to be out there from 6 PM to 6 AM. And so this proposes a $5 increase to be paid for those people just doing that night work on those assigned instances where it comes up because of the state regulations. Not, for plowing snow on County Road K at 10 o'clock tonight. It just pertains to that assigned schedule.
All right. That seems pretty clear. That'll be, no, this is just a report. It'll be voted on by the county board. So just to keep us in the loop. Facilities, second reading on the use of county parks. We talked about that last time. So I think we can move on to C, judiciary and law.
I think, did actually an amendment to it
Oh, okay.
get written or?
By there it is. Just by way of information, Supervisor Gary Bjork has met with me a few days ago, and he's planning on making a motion to the ordinance language, which would keep Caddy Woodlawn Park subject to being closed during nighttime hours because it has historic county historic structures in it. But then it would open the remaining parks to be open round the clock and subject to the decision of the sheriff to close or the facilities department to close for some important reason. So I'm going to prepare amendments, as I often do. I'll prepare an amendment document and have Supervisor Bjork review it. I'll have a copy for the county clerk, a copy for the board chair, and then probably make a few notes. We already went over the parliamentary procedure involved, so I feel like he's got it, he's bringing his motion, and you'll hear about it all next week.
Okay. And we will see how we vote. I have a judiciary and law, I presume. There's a C here, but I don't have an item under C. I'm guessing that's I'm guessing it's an artifact from the last agenda because Supervisor Calabrese doesn't know about it. So I'm gonna call that good. And then we are on to 8 reports of the standing committees. Oh, all right. Supervisor Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We last met on Thursday, the 28th of September.
Committee would that be?
That would be the Health and Human Services Board, Standing Committee, and 3 outstanding community members. Thank you. We decided to get ahead of the game and we reviewed our legislative agenda, which needs to go to the legislative committee, I believe, next month. So we reviewed our 2023 fairly lengthy legislative agenda, decided to keep most of the items, and we will consider it at our next meeting, which is the 26th of October, with some additions that the members and staff have suggested. We had regular reports from each of our 3 departments, Veteran Services, Public Health, and Human Services. Among the items shared with us from the Health Department are plans to create an in-house drinking water testing lab, plans for that to become self-sustaining fairly quickly, beginning this year, and obviously an excellent and probably very needed service for our constituents. We had an excellent report from Human Services, as always, and heard from Becky Albright, who is the new deputy director, about her tasks and the ways in which she and Miss Winter have sort of divided up the important work of the Human Services department. We noted review of the August vouchers, sort of the Human Services lengthy checkbook every month. And as I said, our next meeting is October 26th here.
Thank you, Supervisor Morehouse. Supervisor Zons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Community Resources and Tourism Committee met in this room yesterday. So everything's fresh in my head, which is great. We heard from Extension, had a report from the horticulture educator about some of the gardening items that have been happening this year, which was great to learn about, especially some of the native prairie plants that have been planted and were blooming, which was like years ahead of time, I guess. So that was good to hear. We got an update from Chris on communications and some of the press releases. And if you happen to see, the press release came out about the new Visit Dunn County website and already got picked up by a couple of outlets. So it's gotten some press and hopefully some added participation in it. We had initial discussion about the new broadband task force and getting some participants on that to our illustrious chief over here, so he can make his appointments to that committee eventually here.
I was just gonna ask if you had a list for me yet.
That's what we're working on right now. And our next meeting is coming up November 14th before the regular county board meetings. We're gonna have a marathon day that day.
Thank you, Supervisor Zons, and good luck. Supervisor Calabrese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judiciary and Law Committee met a couple weeks ago in this room, although I was not there, I was on Zoom. And regular reports from all the departments, and the CJCC got a family treatment court enhancement grant for $185,000 over the next 3 years. And the DA has received $115,000 in federal victim witness grant funding. The Sheriff's Department reported that there have been 20 crashes since we opened up the UTV routes. Most of those on the routes, so 20 crashes, and there had been, up till July, there have been 20 UTV accidents since the roads opened up, and there were only 20 UTV crashes prior to the more roadways opening up from the beginning of the year to July. So that gives you an idea of how many since they opened up, and part of the sheriff's concern about the rec officer. And that was about the gist of the meat of the meeting. And there will be another one in this room on October 23rd at 4:30.
Thank you, Supervisor Calabrese. Supervisor Kinnear.
Thank you. This is for the neighbors of Dunn County, Supervisor Zons. We have 8 of 9 households open and gradually filling that 8th one. Working on the legislative agenda. Supervisor Steen, get that ready. And COVID's been kind of active on and off. Scott Nebefeld's been doing a great job of keeping the building going really well. It's a good job. And a recent state survey was excellent. They always find something, but not much here. So good job. And our next meeting is going to be for 2 months, October, November, and that'll be on the 14th in this room.
Thank you, Supervisor Kinnear. Supervisor Prochnow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Highway. We finished up my road project.
For the people at home.
I didn't see you there. Finished up the Highway Z project. We're finished up the blacktopping Highway Z, Highway Q and W project. They got a shouldering now, and they'll be marking those roads. Shop has been busy updating all the equipment to get ready for the snow plowing season. Starting to make salt sand right now. Going around mowing some of the ditches that need more ditching, mowing. Railroad crossing had nothing to do with the county. That had everything to do with the railroads. We have no control over that whatsoever. But we did request them to fix all that, and they have been out fixing all the railroad crossings. But we have no money involved, and it was not us. Hope everybody's listening. Otherwise, that's about it. Our next meeting is
December 8th, I think.
Thank you Supervisor Bracco now. Supervisor Calabrese, I think has a question
Yeah,
for you.
can I ask, up by the Menominee Junction, I see more of those railroad plates, like new ones, look like they're getting ready to go in there on the road. Do you happen to know when?
The railroad lets us not know anything.
Okay.
Nope.
They won't even let us know a day ahead of time.
Okay,
So.
thanks.
Thanks. Supervisor Vogel.
Thank you. So the Facilities Committee met on September 27th at 6 p.m. And we had a discussion about Menominee Youth Hockey Association lease and their use of the footprint and beyond the footprint for camping, because they charge people for camping and they camp on the county footprint and not just ours. So I think there's going to be discussion with the Menominee Youth Hockey Association and looking at how maybe we could get a piece of that camping if they're going to use our land, because sometimes they leave ruts and then we have to fix it. Then we had staff and recreation reports. So the fair board, they're already starting. I think she said 2 years in advance, the fairs. And then facilities and parks, their operations are going well. And then we had Abrina Leonard, who did a report, energy report, looking at solar and how we can reduce our energy usage. And so we had a few questions for her as well, and some of the things we could look at. And then a big discussion with the Colfax shooting range, because they want to open a 400-yard range, and that will require taking out some of the trees. And so they're going to, Scott's going to go out there and look and see what kind of trees are they taking out and what kind of arrangement, if they get to keep the money or how that would work. They did talk to the neighbors and they were okay, and they would make sure there's someone there watching before anyone uses the range. And then you'll see the fair board appointments coming through. And then our next meeting is October 25th at 6 p.m.
Thank you Supervisor Vogel. Supervisor Headland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we met, committee administration did meet here in this room Thursday, September 28th at 3 o'clock. We reviewed 2 months of vouchers. I mean, we skipped our meeting a month ago, so we did vouchers from 8/17 up through 9/18 and reviewed some before that. Health insurance structure and premium contribution rates were discussed and approved. And, you know, those are all basically in print from Jenna. We passed a resolution amending shift differential pay for the highway department, that $5 increase. And then a contingency request from the district attorney's office came to us. And that request basically, my summation is that something they had planned to do with a digital evidence management system that needs improvement because of the amount of management of information they have to do with body cameras now and so forth. And they were going to do that in 2024, but it worked out. It needed to be done at this point because of the way things were going. And so we did approve a $30,000 request from this year's contingency fund to move forward with that in 2023. And they can take that off their 2024 budget then. So it's nothing that wasn't planned. It just was timely to do it now. Our next meeting will be October 26, 2023, 3 o'clock here in this room. Thank you.
Thank you Supervisor Headland. Our next meeting will be here November 8th, 2023 at 3:30 p.m. And with that, we are adjourned. And we made it in 2.5 hours by like 30 seconds.